that set up. I got way late for a curtain on the way in, so gotta use this. Yeah. Alright, sorry about that. Happy Wednesday, my most excellent scholars. I almost hit you with a happy Wednesday, my dudes, but it's probably a bit too informal. Also, you probably don't remember that vine, so yeah, that's okay. Alright, so today we are continuing on the same path we started last class, right? Last class we focused on biological issues. Right, the problems of being squishy but adaptable human beings when it comes to going into space, right? Space is hard, it is a cold, radiation-filled vacuum that just wants to kill us every step of the way. Right? Now, going to planets makes it a little bit easier. Planets can help solve some of those problems. But ultimately, we are frail creatures in a cold and uncaring universe. Right? Just wanted to, lay that there. But we got something going for us, which is nice. Pretty smart. I mean, like on the aggregate, we can be kind of dumb, but individual humans can be really smart. We have this ability to innovate. And as a species, right, our big evolutionary thing, other than opposable thumbs, is that we can think. We're adaptable. We use tools. We are able to think through problems. So what we're dealing with today are big tech problems, right, that we need to overcome in order to actually be able to do this thing, right? This is going to be the last science-y day, just for the record. Next week we're going to jump into law. It's going to be much more us. Yeah. But we have to establish that this is within the realm of possibility, we can actually do this in the nearer term. Now, we know we got some showstoppers, we know we got some big problems that we're going to have to overcome. So let's talk about the tech things, right? And so for today, right, you'll have some readings to do, right? The second chapter of my book. I hate doing that. But it's better than reading 4 other books, which is what we did the last time we taught this class. Saving a little bit of work. And then also a section out of Red Mars, right? So Red Mars, Blue Mars, Green Mars, Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars, the Mars trilogy, are really trying to put a human face on these problems, right? I know that talking about a lot of these issues that we're going to be dealing with this semester is pretty abstract, right? So seeing stories, I think, helps us understand how these problems might impact us, right? So there's a reason why I'm still having y'all read chunks out of those books. And I gave you also, hopefully, we've done our readings for today. Remembering that we do turn in our short papers every time. So make sure you get one of those in. So today, we're going to be talking about tech problems. I've got some I'm going to bring up, and I'm hoping we can get more into the interaction way of doing this, more of the seminar style of it. today, right? We did a great job last Wednesday. Last Wednesday was freaking awesome. Like, I love that. It was a little too loose, so we want to tighten that up just a little bit. I love it. We want to tighten it. So today when we come to tech problems, some of these are going to be biology problems, some of these are going to be engineering problems. We're going to approach several different problems we get. So I'm going to put it into 3 different categories. Getting there, stopping, which is actually really important and might be one of the biggest problems we have. And 3, living. All right, 3 big categories of problems that we have to science, to figure, to engineer, to use technology to get us out of the problem, right? So our first set of problems is just getting there. Now, we've already touched on this one. I think we've done a decent job of digging this already, so we're not going to spend too much time on it, but I do want to highlight kind of the big problems and the bigger considerations to get here. Right? So, to really get at why this one is much of a problem, right? We got rockets. We've probably had rockets since at least the 80s that could get us to Mars. Right? We've probably been able to do this for about 40 years from a purely propulsion standpoint. We've been sending stuff to Mars for decades. And we've been at the point where we probably have enough heavy lift capacity to move some people there. Right? Not move them, but at least get them there. We probably had that at least since the late 80s, early 90s. So we've done a whole thing with that. But the problem that really shows up for us here right now is a problem of scale. Right? There is a certain minimal viable size of a population that you need for it to be self-sustaining, right? That there's just 10 people is not going to make a functional society, right? Just the 10 of us go to Mars, we're all going to die, right? Or we're not, at least not going to. If we don't keep getting resupplied, we don't have enough ability between the 10 of us to grow enough food to maintain our systems, to keep ourselves alive, and then actually build out and expand into a full-size civilization. It's too small of a group. So the problem here is you need to scale up. Now, there's a lot of debate over what a minimum viable population size to build out from is. But I kind of settle on the about 5,000 to 7,000, which you really need to establish a society that's big enough that it can continue to grow on its own. So we're talking, well, so 7,000 people, that's half Thibodeau size? I don't know, what's Thibodeau's population these days? I think it's 14,000. Yeah.
You're right, 14,191.
We just had a census, so about half of Thibodeau. Yeah, that's pretty good. The population of students at Nichols, right? The entirety, right? That's the right number. That's the number of people you would have to get to Mars for it to actually be a kernel of a society. Right? So that's the number we're looking for, so that you can grow up. Right? You still want to grow more beyond that, right? But 5,000 is like your very bottom that you can do. Right? It's estimated that when the Tuba volcano blew about 70,000 years ago, the human population dropped down to about that number. And then we all regrew, right? We regrew this, the species from that number. So that seems to be kind of our minimal viable number. So we're talking about launching not just 5,000 people to the surface of Mars, but all of the material that they're going to need to be able to bootstrap a civilization. Right? We talked about bootstrapping as the concept yet. I mean, we've touched on it, right? It's just basically enough of technology, you can literally pull yourself up by bootstraps and build a civilization, right? To actually build a fresh civilization. So we're talking about 5,000 people and all the stuff that they need. The estimate is that it's going to take about 10 tons of material per person to keep them alive, right? That's kind of the bare minimum amount of stuff. So not only 5,000 people, but 50,000 tons of stuff. And that's cutting it real short. Tons, T. Right, that's like the most optimistic minimal amount of stuff that you would need, right? Because that's not only including just the materials to build, that's the equipment that you need to build with, that's air, that's water, that's everything. That's a very small amount, 10 tons. So that's probably really on the low side. This is like the optimist best case scenario number, just to work with me. Okay, so then let's talk about how much stuff we can put into orbit in one go. And this is just to orbit. Because then you have another problem. Once you get to orbit, you have to get it out of orbit and onto another orbit. Remember, our big cost all along the way here is change in velocity. Anytime we want to change our orbital plane, we're going to have to add speed or subtract speed. And anytime you're changing your velocity, that requires more propulsion. So it's a lot of stuff we got to move. It's a lot of people we got to move. And each launch with a super heavy, right? This is like the biggest rocket we've ever built. Can carry 100 tons. Takes 100 tons to get to orbit. Or then you can launch 100 tons in one go. But that only gets it to orbit. From there, you have to get it out of orbit to the next place. So for every single launch of people and stuff, it's going to take 4 more launches of fuel to be able to refuel it so it can actually go. Right? So you load up your car with gas, right? You got to load up your car with gas to get somewhere. What happens when you run out of gas? You can't go anymore. So you got to refill your tank. But here's the thing, when you launch fuel to orbit, you're not able to carry a full load, right? Because it's also heavy. So it's going to be heavy, so you can only take up about 1/4 of a tank at a time. You run out of gas, right? You can't bring enough gas tanks with you to refill it. So you got to walk, right? You do the walk of shame. Go to the gas station with your red can, fill up your red can, and you walk back. And you fill up. Except here's the thing. Your car won't start unless it has a full tank. Right? It won't get you where you need to go unless it's a full tank. So you have to completely fuel it before you leave, because there ain't no more gas stations between here and Albuquerque. Right? You gotta have a full tank before you get there. I don't know why I went to Albuquerque. There's plenty of gas stations between here and Albuquerque. Between Alexandria and Shreveport. You got like 2 stops. That's all you got, right? So you know you got to refuel. So there's an entire infrastructure that needs to be built up in order to be able to get enough mass into orbit to go. And you only have a very short window to launch. Remember our Hohmann transfers? You get a shot about every 18 months or so. So just sending one at a time, you're never going to get there. So you got to do a whole bunch of these things at any given time. Right? This is a major logistical headache, right? So just getting there, we're going to have to scale up. Not only just building these rockets, right? We still haven't launched a super heavy yet. It's never been done. We've never launched a Starship. Probably going to happen this year, but we'll see, right? COVID. Luckily, they're out in the sticks in Texas, so they kind of just do their thing. So we'll see what happens, right? Brownsville, Texas is The middle of nowhere.
It's in the middle of BFE, like literally.
Yeah, and then they're in BFE of BFE. They're right on the border with Mexico, out in an estuary, but it's not like a biologically important estuary because it's already just like, it's kind of the perfect place to launch. So they're just rapidly building stuff out there. They're attempting to do a scale, right? They're not talking about building one rocket. They're talking about building a rocket factory. They can crank out one of these things like every 2 weeks.
That's kind of scary.
Right?
But that's what's gonna be.
I mean, think about it, they've had decades of building cars and they still can't take bugs out of cars when they hopefully.
Right? So, and I say, right? Like, if you ask me, do I want to go to Mars? The answer is obviously yes. Like, I want to be one of these, I want to be one, okay, I don't want to be one of the 5 guys. I want to be like that next bit. I do not want to go in the first wave. I don't want to go, I wouldn't want to go until like, it's already relatively stable. Now, if they pay me to go early and be like the political administrator there, like, okay, cool, I'll do that job. I'll do that job, but you gotta pay me, right? So they have, right, this has to scale up. So not one is not going to be enough here, because if you were just to launch 100 tons at a go, that's about 50 people. So at 50 people, that's 500 launches just to get your minimum viable amount there. It's a lot, right? It's a tough thing to do. You have to have 100 rockets, and really you need more than that because you got to have the refueling platforms. And we're talking about building up an entire infrastructure. So just getting there is a problem. But this is a workable problem. This is a problem that, like, we're on this one. I don't know how much it's going to be able to scale up and how fast. I think the first thing you got to do is preload some supplies there. So your first one, you don't even send people, you just send ships, and you keep those there, and you use that essentially as your habitats for your first wave delivery. And if we can start doing that in the next 4 to 6 years, that lays the groundwork for what can come later, allows us to scale up, and we have our first, right, maybe you send 100 people the first time, right, 2 ships over, and you have them start building, right, you don't, right, a little bit of exploration, but mostly building. And then from there, you send more people so that they can show up. Every time you have a new wave show up, every 2 years, you've got 2 more years to scale up for what comes next. So this can scale up, right, this absolutely can scale up, and the other thing is the rockets, the ships, when they get there, you can either keep them there or send back so they can reload. So not only do you have the ships that landed there come back, you can build more here and scale up that way. Right? So this can grow, this can scale up. I think the getting there is going to be doable. But again, this is a slow trip, right? This is the slow boat. This is the equivalent of taking the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria across the ocean, or Magellan's ship, right? This is not modern airplane travel. That's not what we're talking about. This is the slow boat. So we're also trying to work on new propulsion technologies, get to the point where we can constantly accelerate. If you can constantly accelerate between Earth and Mars, that cuts your travel times in half, right? Much shorter, and it reduces the problem of changing your velocities. But for now, right, we got to go with what we've got, right, or at least what is in the pipeline. So getting there, we have the basic technology, right? It's super heavy plus Starship. And the other nice thing about this, it's reusable, right? The rockets are right. The booster is literally going to land back on the launch pad where it came from. The starships have enough propulsion to hit themselves up and down. They're designed to be able to launch themselves to Mars. Mars has a third of gravity, so it should be able to take itself off without need of another booster. You should be able to refuel it on Mars' surface, right? The idea is that they're going to send methane creation plants, right, processing plants to make the rocket fuel. And you can make it in situ, because they got carbon, they got hydrogen, they got oxygen. We can make it there. So getting there. The problem really with getting there is scaling up and building an infrastructure where we can actually do it. It'd be awfully great if instead of having to send fuel up, we could just pull the fuel already in orbit, right? Maybe build gas stations in orbit already so that we can do this. But that's further down the road.
I like that idea.
You don't like it, or you do?
No, I do.
Yeah, if we could fuel, right? If we had gas stations along the way, that'd be great. Yeah.
It's the super heavy and the what?
The Super Heavy and the Starship.
Okay.
Yeah, I prefer the old name.
Yeah. No, I just have forgotten the SS.
Yeah, so it had a better name. But they were really worried about what the public would say about it.
Yeah.
I really hope that Elon Musk was going to go full autistic and just make people say this like in congressional hearings. Excuse me, Senator, but could you please use the proper name for the rocket? It's the big fucking rocket. Language, I know.
Yes. I really wish.
That's the timeline I really wish we were on, but he decided to be a big boy for like half a second and changed the name. I'm sure someone was like, Elon, you cannot name it the BFR. That can't be its real name. Like, fine. Do what you want. All right. So we got one set of problems is just getting up to speed, changing our plane and getting there, right? And scaling it up enough to get the people there. The second problem, and this is, honestly, this is the big showstopper for me. Slowing down. And not just slowing down enough to get into Martian orbit, but then getting from Martian orbit to the surface. Because Mars has a problem. It has lower gravity, and it has a thinner atmosphere. Which means you can't use parachutes. There's no, the math just doesn't work. You cannot use a parachute to slow yourself down enough from the speeds you'll be going. The parachute, right, we've actually tested this. The parachutes instantly rip themselves apart. Right? There's actually been tests done, right? If you pop a parachute high enough up in our altitude, it's the same as going into Martian altitude at the same speeds. Like SpaceX has experimented with this. They explode, like instantly. They go out and they instantly explode, and it has no effect. So that's a problem, right? You actually have to, delta V to Mars orbit. So you actually have to slow down once you get there. Right? To slow down once you get into orbit. That's probably not as big of a deal, right? You gotta have a little bit of fuel left in the tank. All you gotta do is slow down enough to orbital insert. We can probably handle that. The bigger problem is problem B. Change in velocity to Mars' surface. Right, so thinking about how we land stuff on Mars has been quite an evolution. When we first started landing things on Mars, we tried parachutes. They were light, the objects were light enough that they would work. Right? There wasn't that much mass coming in at Mars. You could use the atmosphere to slow it down some, pop the parachutes, and they would land. But as we started to build bigger things, and we're not talking much bigger things, we're talking about something the size of this desk. You want to land something the size of this desk, parachute will work. So this was a fun one. Instead of using a parachute, we use parachutes to slow it down, but not all the way. Right? It's not enough that it can just land nicely and not break all of our stuff. So instead, we put a whole bunch of airbags on the outside of the object. Once it's slowed down, then we literally just let it bounce around. Like, let the airbags just take the rest of the hit and land. But if you go bigger than that, if you go to something the size of a car, which we've done, we have landed things the size of a car on Mars, you need a whole new piece of technology. What we've come up with for something that size is a sky crane. So you have your little payload, right, the thing you want to, we'll do a little rover here. Right, we got a rover, and you put it on a lander. The lander doesn't land. The lander has rockets. So it gets to a certain altitude, the parachute, it's still going. This thing fires its rocket, so it propulses. And then it floats, right? Because it lowers the thing to the ground. It's literally a sky crane. So it lowers it down. And then it detaches the cables and flies off. That's what we've come up with for something the size of a car. We're talking about something that can carry 100 tons. It's massively bigger, right? It's the size of the bell tower at LSU. It's the size of, I'm trying to think of something around here that might be, if you laid it down to be the size of the football stadium, this is a big thing. It's heavy. So how do you get that to the surface? Can't use parachutes to slow down. Those just instantly explode. What you got to do, what the current plan is, let's see if I can draw one. This thing is going to like belly flop its way down, right? Adjust its own entry trajectory to help it slow down as it hits the atmosphere. And then it's going to turn the rockets back on. And just like the boosters that I showed you all the other day, it's going to attempt to do that onto the surface. All the way down, have some legs, and land. It's called propulsive landing. This seems crazy, right? This is like a crazy Buck Rogers sort of idea, but they've been testing this. Like most of the landings of the boosters that we've been using today, they turn on at higher altitudes, or at least they used to. They would turn on at a higher altitude and then stop. They were actually gathering data on what the Martian atmosphere would be like at that point and how much force they could use at that point. They would simulate a landing during a re-entry. These guys are mathing in ways that NASA wishes they could at this point. So, can we actually slow down enough to land on the surface and survive? I would really like to do this with some uncrewed missions first, actually on the surface, just so we know. I would like to go to Mars and not get squished on the landing. That would be great. The thing that gives me hope for this, and I think this is going to work, is at this point, landing rockets is like not super easy. It's very difficult, but it's rote. It's regularized. It's a thing we do. We've done this over 100 times now. We know what to do. They've pretty much figured it out. So I think getting there, it's a problem of scale. Stopping, more or less, we've got that. So the big problems come in with the living. Actually getting out and trying to live. This is where we go back to all those squishy biology questions from last class, right? And we would have to find a technological solution to them. So, we need air. Where do we get air? We're going to bring a bunch with us, but as long as there's water there, we got hydrogen, we got oxygen, we can process what we've got, right? We've been doing this for a long time. They don't bring up a whole bunch of air to the space station every time we refill it like a balloon. They have air recycling. Right? So we need recyclers. And we need oxygenators to add extra oxygen in. We already do this, right? We've been living through a pandemic where we worry about the air quality and getting enough oxygen to people. And they've been doing this on the space station for a long time. I think air, we can put that one, we got that one. Making sure that we get better, more efficient ones, we can reuse more of it. It's going to be important, but we've had enough of this technology since the 60s. This one's fine. Submarines stay under for 6 months. without really resurfacing, like, this one's fine. All right, next one, water. Gonna need water. It's gonna be really hard to bring all the water we need with us because it's super heavy, right? It's a real heavy thing. So we need, hopefully, water in situ. Right? If there's water there, which again, it seems like there's actually water there. That's like bonus. But we still want recycling, purification. And we want to be able to find it in situ. Again, we do this. We already do this. If you distill water, right, you take all the impurities out of it, you get pure water, you add a little bit of minerals back in, you're fine there. But to do all that, you need the next thing, power. Where are we going to get the power from? Right? Wind's not going to work. You can't use wind power because it's too thin. Solar's going to be able to provide some.
Then nuclear.
Probably going to need nuclear in some fashion. Probably start off with fission. Hopefully one day move to fusion. Can't really use hydro because it's all frozen. So these are kind of the choices we have. You can't use fossil fuels because, well, there's no oil on Mars. And you don't want to have to ship all that over there. It's going to be problematic. It's already got too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere anyway. So figuring out how to get that out of the atmosphere is going to help us here, right? Synergy going on there. But nuclear reactors, pretty small. Generate a lot of power. It's going to be pretty useful. NASA's already got, and SpaceX is trying to license kilowatt level fission reactors that are about the size of that desk. They mostly just use a thermal reaction as opposed to like generating steam and all of that. Generates 1,000 watts. That's enough to run a decent habitat to do this. You can scale those up as well, get up to 10 kilowatts. A megawatt would probably require a lot more controls on it, but the kilowatt to 10 kilowatt range, pretty doable. At least to begin with, and then hopefully we can scale that up real heavy. Food. This is going to require the ability to farm, right? You're going to have to be able to grow your food on the surface. So you need essentially factory farming.
We're good at that.
We're good at that. We already got it.
Yeah, good.
We're good at growing food. We've been doing it for a long time. We can grow it in much heavier densities with aeroculture, aquaculture, right? Either grow it, hydroponics or aeroponics. We do this. We got this. I'm not super worried about it. The one problem is going to be providing the light for it. LEDs are really efficient, right? And LEDs help your food grow, right? You pour light on it all the time, grows faster. We just need the chemicals to help this work. Nutrients. You need all the nutrients that plants crave, which isn't drawn down, even though it has electrolytes. Okay. We need somewhere to live. We need habitat. Okay, which is going to combine atmosphere, water, all of these questions. You need some place to live. Now, initially, you're probably going to be living in these things. Probably going to be living, at least initially, in the ships themselves. We're going to talk about the crucible of it because I think that illustrates some of these problems really well. But you need livable volume.
Livable what?
Volume. Like space. You literally you need a space in which people can live. Because with that comes pressure, air, right? Air pressure, atmosphere, and all the other stuff that we need to keep our squishy selves alive. So initially, right, we can live on these, but who wants to live in a tin can for a long period of time, right? Like the first thing you're going to want to do is build something better, right? This is like camping, like in a bivouac, right? Like the little one-man tent, nobody wants to live in that for a long time, especially since there's going to be a bunch of people crammed on top of each other. You're going to want to build out a livable space as quickly as possible. So there's probably going to be a couple different phases of doing this, right? Building something probably in the ground right off the bat. And then ideally you would take, right, you'd land near a canyon, hopefully there's canyons near where water is. You could take a smallish canyon and dome it off, right? Cap it up, make sure it's airtight, and then start building out from there and living in that. That would be kind of an ideal situation. Or building into a hill, doing something similar to that. But if the canyon's already there, that's probably your best bet. That's my proposal. That's the one that I buy into the most. Is at least initially living in canyons until we are able to scale up other technologies. Well, canyon living, it's nice. So that, right, those are kind of our major tech problems that need to be solved. I don't see anything here except for maybe, well, if we don't actually find the water in situ, that's a complete showstopper. If we're not able to actually get enough power, that could be a big showstopper. But for me, the big one is actually getting to the surface. Because if this doesn't work, then we got to find something else to do. Right? We essentially, if you're going to put people on Mars, it's going to have to be a propulsive landing. That's the only thing we can do. So that has to get figured out. And if that doesn't work, then it's over. So that's, so far, what I see, right? These are the showstoppers that I identified. Was there anything else? I don't remember right off the top of my head what I wrote in my book. Did I identify anything else that was really big? Right, not talking about our own long-term biology things, like the radiation protection, reproduction, and then eyes, bone density, that stuff. I think this covered all. Can y'all think of anything else that's going to be a problem? Just right on, right, if we're just talking about a quick, right, getting up to that 5,000 person scale, right? So not even the city scale, but the small town scale, the small university size.
I don't think you'd have a problem with that. I think you'd find people who would want to go.
Well, yeah, right. Right. Recruiting the population is going to.
That would be a problem. I don't think.
Yeah, the recruitment is, well, presents its own set of problems. We've got a whole week just on that stuff. Right.
Not a lot of people who would want to go to Mars.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that would want to do this, right? This is the next frontier. It turns out that humans, some of us carry a gene. Like there's literally a gene that's been identified that's in about 2% of the population. That is literally the gene that's, I gotta go over the next hill. I gotta move further out, gotta find the frontier. They call it the explorer gene. About 2% of the population has it. I think 23andMe, their health one, can identify if you have it. I would be very surprised if when I finally get my results back, I don't have it. Like, that would really surprise me. But there's a certain percentage of the population that just wants to do this, right? It's literally in our genes that we want to go beyond to the next frontier. And that's really what's driven our society forward, is finding new frontiers, right? That's one of the big things about humans. We like to spread, we like to go. I mean, look, we have the whole exploration and discovery history map up already. And this is just Europeans. Right? This is missing a lot of other exploration. There's no, they did China one? They don't have any of the stuff the Chinese did on here. They don't have any of the stuff in the Mesoamerican societies, the African societies. This is just a bunch of cranky Europeans getting on boats. And this runs across all of humanity. We have this need and urge to move forward, to see new frontiers. And there's kind of an interesting line of research that's been coming out of thought that, like, maybe the reason why we've been having so much strife in the last century is we kind of did all the frontiers we have to us. Right? There's no new frontier. For those of us that feel like we need a little more elbow room to get out more, there's nowhere else to go. I mean, there's plenty of frontiers, but everything's been explored. Did it all. So maybe in opening up what's called the high frontier, right, that's another way you'll hear this referred to, that helps us get around cultural, technological stagnation. This could be a big, next leap forward. There's something, at least I feel this, right? I don't know if I 100% buy into the stagnation because we ran out of frontiers, but I don't not buy into it, if that makes sense. I'm more willing to accept it than immediately reject it. But that's not to say there's not going to be major problems along the way, right? I think ultimately we can do this. I think from a purely engineering technological perspective, this is a doable thing, and it's doable in a shorter time frame than we had perhaps initially thought it would be. Right? They always say going to Mars is 20 to 30 years away, but now the number is 5, 7. I would say by the end of this decade, someone's going to have been to Mars. I think there's a chance that we put boots on Mars before NASA puts boots back on the moon. Right? I think it's starting to become pretty clear that what NASA is doing with their space launch system, and this is getting into a particular element of questions about technology that I do want to explore a little bit today as well. Right? It's this question of why do we adopt technologies, right? Why do some technologies succeed and others fail? And we're going to illustrate it by looking at the SLS, right, NASA's rocket, versus the SpaceX rocket, and the choices that NASA has made. It's this concept called buy-in. I used to throw the word societal in front of this, and I think that still matters, but I don't think it has to be a whole society that chooses anymore. A lot of this is building off of what's called change theory. By Everett Rogers. This is kind of my own side trip off of it, right? That's the benefit and drawback of getting a professor's research, is you get the cutting edge stuff, but it's also not like 100% baked. Like, I'm saying this is not full baked. Still baking this, still in the oven. But in order for anything to succeed, we have to choose to use that thing. Think about, y'all probably old enough to remember when Blu-rays came out. It wasn't just Blu-ray, there was Blu-ray, there was HD DVD, right? Can you buy an HD DVD today? No, you cannot. It failed. Society did not adopt the HD DVD. It did adopt the Blu-ray. Now, format wars are stupid and all of that, but society, through no outside intervention, right, ended up going towards the Blu-ray as the major format. Of course, does Blu-ray even really matter now? We stream, right? There was a complete outside thing. So even though we had adopted the Blu-ray, turns out the real future was in streaming stuff. Right? We didn't even see that coming. We didn't even know that was an option. And we bought into that as the thing that we do, right? Societies choose what's going to be our suite of technologies, right? From, when I say technology, I just talk about a way of doing things. So when I say technology, I'm not just talking about like the pen or the tablet. I'm also talking about things like democracy, right? The technologies of politics as well. So we choose what's going to succeed. So let's talk a little bit about what NASA's and our government's choices have been. NASA's made a series of choices since its inception that have led it to where it is today. So the first thing that they chose to invest in, right, the Mercury program. Now, the fun thing about the Mercury program, the rockets that they used for the Mercury program were literally the exact same rockets that we put our ICBMs on. Right? Our nuclear weapons, literally the exact same rocket. You take the nuke thing off the top and you put the Mercury capsule on the top instead. Exactly the same thing, and even more fun.
Yes, I remember.
The weight of the nukes is about the same weight as the people.
I remember reading about that in my one of my other papers.
Yeah, so
Yeah, it was like, it seems like a good idea on paper.
well, no, it was a great idea on paper because they were trying to show the Soviets
Yes.
that we can throw nukes all around the world.
Yes.
Like, this whole thing was informed by a political context, by a social context. Right? None of the decisions we make are devoid of a context. We don't make decisions in a vacuum. Right? There's always something driving it. So they go from Mercury, and they make a bigger rocket. They put 2 people in orbit at the same time. Then they decide they're going to the moon, baby. And they build up Apollo. That's 3 people and all the stuff they need to get to the moon. Big program, big rocket. There was a problem with Apollo 1. Apollo 1 ended up burning up on the launch pad during a test, killing astronauts. They stopped the space program for about 2 years. They restarted, kept going, because they were still young, they were still full piss and vinegar, and they wanted to go to the moon. So they get to the moon. Just as an aside, anyone want to take a guess at the average age of a person in mission control on the day we landed on the moon? Like the people making the decisions and making this thing actually happen in 1969. What did you say?
54.
25.
It's 27. So these same people that were 27, right? So they were 27 in 1969. Like there were 18-year-olds that started in mission control with the Mercury program. Like this was like y'all's age doing this.
Be terrified.
Yes.
Imagine if, yeah.
But no, it had right? That is a different culture, right? Young people are willing to take more risks. They're willing to deal with problems in different ways, look for new solutions. And the same people that were there on the day we launched the Apollo, a lot of them were there on the last day when the shuttle Atlantis landed for the final time, right? And over the course of that 60 years, right, by the time they're in their 70s, well, I guess at that point it was 50 years, right? By the time they're in their 70s, they've had like a major cultural shift, right? But that's another context for a later day. We get to 1971, and we had to figure out what we wanted to do after Apollo, right? The man at the desk is Richard Nixon. They put in front of him 2 plans. NASA delivers 2 ideas. First plan, build on Apollo, go to Mars. You're going to call it the Ares program. We're going to send 5 people to Mars in the end of the 1980s or the early 1990s. It was going to take a little bit of a lift, but that plan was there, keep rolling. Or, we're going to learn more about low Earth orbit. And we're going to build a space truck. We're going to make it cheap to go to space. We're going to build a space shuttle. And it's going to have this thing on the back that you can like put stuff in. You can change out what you're launching into space. You can hide stuff in it. This might have military applications. Look, I will actually defend Richard Nixon like 90, I'm going to give him a good 92% of the time. I mean, clearly Nixon's going to pick the thing that has military applications, right?
Yeah.
This is Nixon. So we made a decision to go into the shuttle. And you know that quick, easy, like space shuttle, like the idea was that it would launch, it would land, they would put it back on a new stack, you could launch it once every 2 weeks. The fastest they ever turned around a space shuttle launch, the same ship, was 5 months. So it didn't do what it was advertised, and the culture of NASA had begun to shift. The same guys, they were getting older, they were becoming more risk averse, and then Challenger happened, and it just shut NASA down. At that point, they became the most risk averse, maybe one of the most risk averse organizations in the country. Right? They would not take a single risk. Right? So they go down the line of the shuttle. And they know that the shuttle's eventually going to have to go away, they're going to have to come up with some sort of replacement for it. And they've spent the last 15 years dithering about, coming up with like 4 different versions of the same thing, to end up with the SLS. Yes, I know today is me bitching about NASA and their political decision making, but bear with me here, to serve a larger point. So we as a society, through our leadership, have built into the the space launch system. The only people that want this thing to happen are senators. And it's like, pretty much Richard Shelby has pushed this thing through. It was supposed to be cheap and easy. We were going to convert shuttle engines into solid rocket boosters into a new big old rocket. It's going to be more powerful than Apollo, and it would only cost $3 billion per rocket to build one. That was cheap. That's cheap in comparison. We'll get into cost when we get to the political economics of this, the economics of this. We'll talk about cost plus. Pricing. Don't let me forget that. There's no way I'll forget that one. Just mark out 30 minutes. Dr. G is going to bitch about cost plus pricing of contracts. Just put that in your notes. It's going to happen. I'm sorry. So we've chosen this, right? We as a society have chosen the space launch system. The space launch system is more or less, we reinvented the Apollo. So this time we're strapping some rockets to the side of it, right? Make it strong. The space launch system was supposed to have its first launch in 2015. It's never going to fly. They'll launch with one. Maybe by the end of this year. And guess how much money they've spent on developing this thing at this point?
Way too much.
Yes. The estimate was, again, $3 billion to develop it. They have currently spent about $40 billion on it. And it's not even reusable. They didn't even think to make it reusable because they didn't know you could do that when they started developing it. So we as a society have chosen that. Luckily, we don't have to have an entire society buy in to a technology for it to actually work. Turns out governments aren't super great at doing this kind of development. They were good in the early stages, but at this point it doesn't work so well. So we've ended up creating the space launch system. I'll show you the space launch system. I'll show you like the actual space launch system, but we don't have one yet. That's what it's supposed to look like. Looks like a space shuttle. You take the fuel tank, throw their engines on the bottom of it, a couple of solid rocket boosters on the side. This is what you should get. And then you throw basically what looks like an Apollo capsule, except a little bit bigger on the top. Thus we come up with its, Wait, is it? Oh no, that's art. They're all artist concepts, of course. They don't actually have one. All right, versus this thing. Which they're flying, by the way. Old and busted. New hotness. Decisions have been made. NASA does its own thing. It's gone off from the shuttle and has gotten trapped in that path of technology. On the other side of this, we get someone coming from the outside. This is how innovation works, right? This is creative destruction. This is someone in their garage coming up with a new idea. That major idea are reusable launch vehicles. That space launch system, that's going to end up at the bottom of the ocean. That thing, super heavy and Starship, is coming right back on the path. This is a completely different set of buy-in. Right? Instead of society as a whole, right, we are funding, we're giving money to this thing. Your tax dollars at work are on the SLS. Now it's a very, very small piece of our budget, but it's there, right? They've got a whole idea about building a gateway to get to the moon. Like, it's what?
I was looking at my uncle that worked at NASA,
Mm-hmm.
and he actually worked on Skylab, Apollo, and Gemini.
Yeah, right, so he was there during that era.
Yep.
But it was young, hot, coming up with good ideas. At Skylab, they had a couple of leftover Apollos that were supposed to go to the moon, but they ran out of money for that. People got bored with it. So they decided to launch a space station on top of it instead. So the other side of this, right? This is Elon Musk, this is SpaceX. They're going to decide, you know what we're going to do? We're not going to, build a new rocket every time. That's super expensive. We're going to build a whole bunch of them and reuse them to drive costs way down. Now, to get to this thing, which was always their goal, to get to that, they had to go a couple of steps along the way. They were very close to failure. NASA did bail them out with a little bit of money along the way. So I'm not saying that they did it without governmental help. But they've gone down a completely different path of development than what NASA has chosen. And at this point, right, people hate billionaires. We just don't like them. They're arrogant, they got a lot of money, we just don't particularly care for them all that much. But when you have enough money, you can do big things outside of the scope of government. He's made a whole lot of money on Teslas. Teslas are cool, great electric cars, moving us towards an electric future, investing very heavily in solar power, and then throwing a whole lot of money, basically all the money that he gets at this thing. Right? Whereas Tesla is an openly traded stock, SpaceX, completely private. In fact, he says that it's not going to go public until those things are going to Mars on the regular. Which means it's his. Also, he lives in a 40-foot container in Brownsville. Like, so he's not living this lavish life. So he's putting his money where his mouth is and pouring his money into this. So the space launch system, unreusable, taxpayer funded, based on technology that's been outdated for 20 years already. Way overruns costs. The other side of this, Starship, can actually scale. We would never be able to afford and send enough people with SLS to Mars. This would work. Starship potentially can actually scale because of that reusability feature. Plus, it's more powerful. What I think is hilarious is, we've recently started a plan to go back to the moon, right? We're going to use the space launch system to put astronauts into space. And then they're going to go from Earth to the moon. But they're not going to go all the way to the moon like we did last time. They're going to stop at Gateway Station, and then go from Gateway Station to the surface and back up. This solves the problem of needing to really slow down, right, a lander. Right? This does get rid of the problem. It makes it a little bit easier to go back to the moon on the surface. But that gateway, which is an international effort, which is publicly funded, well, they chose a lander, right? They actually chose what the lander is going to be. Does anyone know what the lander?
It's
a starship. It's the top half of a starship. We spent $40 billion to build an architecture that really can't even, it doesn't lift enough stuff to actually get to the moon. It's not powerful enough to do it. And then the last, right, they're going to get off of a tiny little Orion capsule, which is smaller than the size of this room, and get on one of those. You'll see my migraine forming here, right? Like, it's using that with extra, they put 2 extra steps along the way. That can go from the surface of the Earth to the moon with 1 refueling trip. Launch it up, refuel it, send it along the way. This thing is never going to the moon. SLS will never go to the moon. Like, if I could find someone who would actually give me action on that, like, I would put money on that, but I don't think the bet would be worth paying off, because what bookie in their right mind would give you odds that SLS is actually going to put people on the moon? I wouldn't do it. So even though we as societies may choose to buy into a particular piece of technology, doesn't mean that as a species, as a society as a whole, that's the way we're going to go. We've gotten to the point where the nation state itself, and this is bringing our political science back in, the nation state itself is no longer the primary player in this field. Just pay Elon Musk $3 billion, just give him the money, bum a ride. Let's just do that. If that's how we want to go back to, we're already doing it. Just finish it. Okay, also a cool thing. You see those grid fins right there that help steer it back? The launch pad's going to catch it on those. Right? It's not even going to land back. They're going to bring it back to the launch pad and just going to stick some arms out and like trust fall catch the rocket. NASA's like, well, why don't you just drop it into the ocean and pick it back up? I have a lot of respect for NASA prior to 1970. After 1970, that's why I like the old school logo instead of the worm, because the worm was just bad choices. Sorry, a lot of opinion. Let me show you the moon architecture, just the current moon gateway idea. So they're going to launch an Orion to dock with the Russian. Okay, first off, this is, if we ever go to war with Russia, this is not even going to happen, right? They're going to live for a little bit in the NASA part, supplied by the Canadians, and then they're going to have an international one. And then the rest of this is all like, and then this, you see this utilization module right here? That's what's going to dock with the lander, with a Starship that's bigger than this thing. Why? Madeline, insert Madeline.
Yes.
Yes.
.exe stuff. That's, yeah.
Yes, hi.
So we got a rendering of the Starship by the Lunar Gateway, and it's literally bigger than the whole station.
Let's see if I can find that one, because it's.
Yes.
Oh, it's a tiny one. Okay, here's that for you. Right? We as a society have the ability to make decisions. We could call our congressman and be like, stop spending money on this stupid thing. Just do it. Just do it. It's already there. They're going to leave 4 of those things just floating around the moon so that they can pick them up and land just in that. Sorry, calm down. Breathe. Gotta breathe. Just because societies make decisions doesn't mean they make good decisions. And luckily, we've gotten to the point where it doesn't really matter as much. Just got it.
So, in your opinion, would basically NASA and the SLS just be a poorly utilized jobs program at this point?
Oh, it absolutely is a poorly utilized jobs program. NASA's a jobs program at this point. Right, it's basically a holding pen for second-rate aerospace engineers. I said it, and I meant it. A lot of respect for us. I love aerospace engineers. I wanted to be one growing up. I used to want to work for NASA. If I were an aerospace engineer now, if I wasn't working at SpaceX or someone doing really cool other stuff, there's so much interesting stuff going on in the aerospace field, and NASA's doing none of it.
NASA's doing that.
NASA's doing, okay, so all right, let's be fair to NASA. NASA is very good at the unmanned exploration side of things.
Yes.
Right? Sending stuff way far out to explore. What is it? The James Webb Space Telescope is so cool.
Yeah.
Do that. Do the exploring. Do the administrating part. And let the big boys actually handle putting people places. Which is they've already done it. Low Earth orbit, NASA doesn't launch people to low Earth orbit anymore. They don't care, they don't do it anymore. Right? They bum rides. They bum rides from SpaceX. Theoretically, they're going to bum rides from Lockheed Martin, but Lockheed Martin just can't make it work. So, yeah. All right. I do want to briefly talk about the Crucible. So, what kind of problems did our earliest Martians face when they get there? Right? What is the Crucible for them here?
They have to build a civilization.
But not just build a civilization, they have to find a way to keep themselves alive, like, immediately. I think the most interesting part of Kim Stanley Robinson's vision here is that they just launched them. Like, they just sent them over there, like, figure it out. Which NASA would never do. Like, the NASA we have, they would never do. But
I think one of the problems is like as they're building a civilization, there's so many fights about like not only how to do it, but like, no, I need you for this, no, I need the materials for this, like just with that.
oh, it's the Russian guy who never actually goes down to the surface.
Yeah.
Like, he was like, I'm just going to go build like a space station on one of the moons. But everybody needs him because he's clearly the most brilliant one on this whole trip. I love him, right? He's full blown like crazy anarchist guy. I love him. He's one of my favorite characters in the whole thing. Right? They are faced with what I think is a very realistic problem, right? They know that NASA can't, right? They aren't going to have NASA watching over their shoulders the whole time. I don't remember if it's in the Crucible section or not, but they literally took a vote on the trip over, like, yeah, we're just not going to do what NASA told us. We're going to do it our way. So not only are they faced with the problem of they're just going to wing it, because they think they all know better anyway.
I think that was the chapter before.
Yeah, I think it was the section before. It's like the very beginning of the book. But they made a decision that, like, we're just not even going to do what they said to do. We're going to do it our way because we think they're idiots. So I think that illustrates a couple of big problems, right? They have to overcome technological issues very quickly, right? But the fact that they're faced with this life and death situation spurs them on, right? That's one thing that we seem to have kind of forgotten as a species. That problems, if you let people solve problems, we do. Or at least we do or we die. I mean, we die, if he dies, he dies. But trying to do it in a very top-down way, right? NASA can't predict. Right? The space agencies can't predict what's going to happen when they get on the ground. They couldn't have predicted what it was going to be. And they already have faced, right, a human issue here. Right? Beyond just solving the tech problem, it's about the allocation of resources. It's about who goes where, the human resources and the physical resources. And that immediately shows that there's even these pure tech problems that we've been talking about require a social science lens, right? The social sciences, right? People are involved in making these decisions and in fixing problems. So, I think the Mars cycle, right? These three books really put a face on what these problems are going to be, right? What these problems could be. That's why I like science fiction so much, is because it illustrates and allows us to think about what problems can emerge when we oftentimes just think about our own limited sphere of things, right? NASA kind of, right, the Mars cycle kind of takes into account that the nation states back on Earth, they got their own crap to deal with. We'll get to that later on in the semester. But I just pulled up that gateway image, and literally the first thing is a Russian thing. What are the odds that within the next 2 years, the US and Russia are going to be working well and playing well with each other? We just sent troops to Ukraine this morning. Like, well, not Ukraine, but like right next to it.
It's close enough, if one threw a rock, it would start.
Yeah. On the other hand, I did watch a nice interview. They're like the citizens of Kharkiv, like they're right now training with AK-47s, getting ready. They're like, screw it. If you invade us, we're just gonna go guerrilla on your ass, and it's gonna be bloody. There's like 1 million people in Ukraine have already like publicly pledged, yeah, we're just gonna go be partisans. We're gonna fight against you. So while we may not be putting troops there, Ukraine gonna fight. Well, they've got a long history of that.
We don't want you. We don't want you.
Don't do it. So Kharkiv will, if this happens, Kharkiv is going to be one of the bloodiest urban guerrilla conflicts imaginable.
Oh, good lord. Yeah.
So hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully Putin backs down. He realizes that he got a victory in getting the US to freak out. He's able to sell that to his people. He can move forward. And that kind of gives me hope.
What was it they said this morning? Negotiations are extremely slow.
Which is what he wants. That's what Putin wants.
I wonder if it's a diversion for, and a distraction for.
I just think it's a political cloud because they're on this stuff and big councilors like, look at me.
Yeah, every moment that Putin is sitting down with an American representative, every time Biden talks to him in person, that's a win. Because it makes Russia relevant.
Yes.
We should have sent like a low-level diplomatic staffer when they did this, be like, oh yeah, we're keeping an eye on it, but like, they're fine, they're not going to.
So no, we need to do that after.
We should have no-sold him from the beginning and just not give him what he wanted. We can't do it.
But we always give them what he wants.
Alright, so we've gone far afield. Any questions or comments from y'all? We're going to ramp up discussion more heavily over the next couple of weeks. Not that we're going to have a good discussion anyway. Please remember to turn in your short paper for the week, and keep thinking about your question. I know I talked to Bonnie yesterday in the hall. She's got a good path she's going to go down. Next week, I think next Thursday, we're going to have a little bit of more free-form paper discussion time, and I want us to all have a solid idea of what we're going to address by the end of next Thursday. So be thinking about that. The week after that, we're going to start ramping up the group project as well. We're going to start rolling out things. All right, anything else? I'm having fun so far. Y'all learning stuff? Or you feel like you're getting value out of this? Because you couldn't get this anywhere else in the world. So, here we go. All right, I will see y'all. Well, I'll see y'all around. Because I think I see everyone in the hallway every day. It's slowing the Johnson, this guy, yeah. Space Station. Okay, so work on and shuttle. God, I remember seeing you when we were NASA.
And then you can like aeronautics, like consultant and or